Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, and today we're talking with an expert on Hampton Roads government and way of life, Jim Oliver. Welcome, Jim.
Well, thank you, Robin. Look,
you have this perspective of having been city manager or county administrator in 4 of the region's localities, if I've counted correctly this time. One of the things you now do in your retirement or semi-retirement is to work on civic engagement. What the heck is that?
well, about 6 years ago, I was a part of a group that founded a nonprofit called the Hampton Roads Center for Civic Engagement. And in fact, Mary Bunning was on the original board of directors. But part of my experience as a city manager is trying to get citizens involved in their government. And I think with the kind of the democratization of America, you know, where all the rights groups that we've created and that we've moved away, sometimes not so subtly, from the way people used to get things done and be okay with that way, to new kind of undefined ways that sometimes can border on chaos. I mean, you know, we talk about the crowdsourcing nowadays versus top down. You know, people went in have lots of opinions about government, how bad it is and so forth. But there's a lot of new technology. There are a lot of new interest of the public in how they want their governments to be, and they're not just the governments, but how they want the community organizations to be and so forth. So it's kind of a learning exercise, kind of an exploration for how can we be better at getting the things done we want to get done. And we intentionally made it a nonprofit. We're not affiliated with any city or county or state. We're also not affiliated with any party or even academic institution, because we strive to be very neutral and to be able to bring the best thinking to a problem, and hope that over time we can keep proving to the public, we can prove to the city, the county, the state, that we're a good neutral. And if they really have an issue that's tough, you know, we can maybe help them create some process to get that issue addressed in a way that they think satisfies the values that they want to have involved with decisions. So that's kind of what we've been. We've done a lot of work. We did some work with the city of Hampton. We're actually doing some work with WHRO in the city of Hampton right now. A week or two ago, there was a public meeting where we're talking about dropouts in high schools, and we've trained a number of students from Hampton High School and the other high schools to facilitate those discussions. And there's actually a good video out that people might want to pull up as one example of a way to get people, in this case mostly young people, talking about dropouts. It's something very important to them. But we've also facilitated retreats for the TPO, the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization. We were really pretty involved in the Urban Summit a year and a half or so ago that ultimately a lot of people give credit. That was when the Hampton Roads mayors invited the Richmond area, Fredericksburg area, Northern Virginia area mayors together. And a lot of people say that was the beginning of the conversation that really got the transportation funding completed last year in the General Assembly. So we've been involved in that kind of thing as well. We've done a couple of contracts with the city of Virginia Beach around some engagement areas. So again, we're a nonprofit that's exploring, how can you get people back into engaging with their cities, and how can you get the cities to better engage with their people?
Yeah, and I think it is that twofold thing, because it is my job essentially to communicate with citizens, to give them the information that they want, to give them the information we want them to have, and to hear input and feedback. But having been new to government, and I still see myself as an outsider, I understand that outsider perspective, which is you go govern. I have a life. I have kids. I have a family. I have a job. I don't have time to come to City Hall. So how can we get people's attention and interaction without being a burden?
That's a great question. I guess I try to practice tough love. I don't accept that answer from people that I'm too busy. I think citizenship has responsibilities as much as being an elected official has responsibilities or being city manager has responsibilities. And I think, frankly, we've been pretty lopsided at demanding good citizenship. Sadly, it used to be that civics was a core set of courses in our public education systems. You can hardly find civics anymore. In fact, there's a really powerful article in the Harvard magazine about how universities such as Harvard have walked away from civic education over time and the consequences that's having. I mean, we have a terribly civic illiterate public today who can't name their mayor, can't name the governor. And yet we say we want democratic values. We say we want the people to make a big difference. Well, how can you make a big difference with ignorance? Even Jefferson thought, and he was no fan of big government, but he certainly thought citizens needed to be smart about issues. They needed to get some education. So on the one hand, I acknowledge busyness, but I do think, just like you got to do with the other parts of your life, your yoga classes, your dancing classes, you're taking the kids to school, you organize. There needs to be some piece of your life that takes on the responsibility of knowing about the community and what's important. And so there's certainly a lot of renewal that needs to go on with cities and other officials too, because the world's changed so much just in the last 20 years. I mean, the technology is overwhelming. I mean, whether it's the Egyptian springtime or that we've seen what, tweets and cell phones can do. We talk about crowdsourcing now as a way to get things done. So it's a real challenge for a city to figure out how to engage. But to me, it's a two side of the table. I mean, it needs to be a round table. The table needs to be larger, and people need to come there who are citizens. And yes, hopefully the meetings can be set at times that don't directly conflict, with their job or whatever. I will say this: Hampton has a wonderful reputation for engagement.
See, I think so, but boy, if I sit at city council meetings and you hear the same 15 people over and over saying, that's not true. What from your perspective, what has Hampton done that brings us this level of engagement?
Well, Hampton, many years ago, 20, 25 years ago, it got into, they didn't call it civic engagement in those days. They called it neighborhood participation. They called it taking it to the community, but they literally set up youth commissions and citizen groups and gave them responsibilities to really impact stuff. And they won national awards with it. Tom Hanks did a show that featured
on the parenting and family programs.
That's right. And in the family and parenting area, it was hugely decentralized, and the search for the community values was just beyond criticism. I mean, it was so rich, and Hampton has the current city manager has this I Value program and goes around and proactively seeks out the same 15 people at city council meetings. I mean, that's a choice of words that sadly you can find everywhere. And that's not to say those 15 people aren't important and worthy, but but there ought to be a little bit of concern if it's the same 15, no matter what the issue is. And I think that's a nice phrase to say, if we're only getting to the same 15, are we engaging enough, and what do we need to do differently?
And I will say, I look at the results that the city manager, Mary Bunting, has had with the budget involvement, and we've helped with that. And last year, pulling in the schools and doing this joint information, education, and values campaign really made a difference. And we heard from literally thousands of people. I can't remember the numbers, but it was in the 3,000 range. And that's a huge step up from local governments. But when you look at Hampton's population, then I have to stop and say, boy, there's still a lot of people out there who didn't yet participate. But we've grown every year, usually by 100% or so.
One, and I would say from the distance of where I live, Hampton has had a love affair with the school system. I mean, it has worked back when Billie Holiday was the superintendent, the current superintendent, way back. It's just knocked down the typical wall between City Hall and schools. So that, to me, has been a real achievement. You get different students every year, you get different parents every year, and so there's that inculcation process. But the city itself, I think, has had a nice standard for really featuring its schools and really trying to involve them and trying to be community focused and governed. So again, to me, the 3,000, I don't know if that's a bad number. It sounds like a pretty good number. We certainly will do a national poll. They'll do 2,000 people and declare plus or minus 3% error as to what their opinion was.
Well, our challenge is it's a self-selected group. You get to play if you want to play. It's not a sampling, although actually I think we did that too last year. And so there's how do you get more people to play?
Well, again, I think some conscious civic education is a big piece of it. I know that Hampton's past mayors have gone around, for instance, and read in schools, and they've tried to step out and so forth. I mean, so I think you try to be proactive. I think Mayor Ward was doing a blog, and she was doing
she burned up the Twitter, I think, at some point.
And George Wallace, clearly, he's changed some of the style of the city council meeting. He lets people talk a lot more and so forth. So, I mean, I think different styles, come in and out. Probably just some really methodical effort. I mean, maybe some polling or maybe some focus groups to say, ask your question. How can we make you feel more engaged? But again, I think it's a tough love thing. I don't think you just act like, well, the government is wrong. It doesn't somehow get all of this. I mean, I think citizens need to look in the mirror too and say, am I being a good citizen? I mean, we ask the city council people to look in the mirror, and we ask the manager, and we ask the public employees. And so, we Americans are great at offering, I can absolutely, my high school quote in the yearbook said, had I been at creation, I would have had a few helpful hints for its betterment. So I can always tell you how you can improve, and that's what a lot of citizens do. The hardest thing is for me to look in the mirror and look at myself and how can I change to be more effective.
And it is hard. I will tell you a story. In my former career at the Daily Press newspaper, I had a reporter columnist who wanted to write a column complaining about a change that the school system was making. Thought it was ridiculous. School system didn't tell me what was going on. And I sat down, I said, tell me how many times the school system called you to invite you to meetings. Well, I don't check those voicemails because they call too often. Did they send anything home with the kids in the backpack? Well, I don't look at my child's backpack. was it in the, was it in your own newspaper that you're supposed to read? Because I read those 3 stories. Well, I didn't read that. Well, you can't write that column. I will not let you write that column because you can't justify it. If you don't do something to involve yourself or to at least read what's in your face, it's very hard for you to then criticize the choice that's been made. And I know that is probably way too harsh, and I wouldn't do that in my city position, but as a boss, I was allowed to. But it is that, there's a give and take there. And certainly we on the city side, one of the things I found is that I have no idea how long it takes to do things and at what point you start talking about those things. And we opened Commander Shepard Boulevard recently. That's a 17-year process. So sometimes when the engineers get started with something or when the acquisition of property comes along, it's such a long, drawn-out process that people who opposed it in the beginning don't even see or remember the success or remember what it looked like. And it's a big challenge to get that picture across.
Well, it really is, and the world has changed a lot. Journalism, I mean, we practice more gotcha journalism nowadays than we do the kind of journalism you were talking about. Columnists are paid to criticize. They're not paid to, the technology, for all of the positive things we can say about it, there's a lot of thought that it's disconnecting us, that people are saying things on Twitter and on the internet that they would never say, and they're not having face-to-face. And so we are becoming a more disconnected people who still have louder opinions. I mean, we're saying things to people that are just not civil anymore, and that's certainly influencing our lack of connectedness. It's not, in my opinion, it's not that the city is disconnecting but so much. And a lot of the delay on a Commander Shepard Boulevard is because of the due process.
Oh, it just
that's been put in so that citizens get a lot of say about whether they ought to be preserved, what the zoning ought to be, not be. And again, the word governance is kind of the word that I think we ought to be talking about. I mean, we're fussing a lot about what the federal government ought to be doing or not doing, what the state government ought to be doing. But what ought they be doing other than don't do that you did today?
Getting back to what those, as Mary calls it, the values. What are the values? And that's one of the things we want to talk about in the budget campaign this year is how important is prevention? How important is reaction? What kind of staff and government do we want to put out there, and how can we leverage other assets? Because it's very clear that government can't do everything now. So how do you work in faith institutions and nonprofit partners and volunteerism, which some people think is the answer to everything, but it comes with challenges of its own.
Well, just what you've said is so hopeful. I mean, you're worrying about the right questions. And we need conversations about that. And ultimately, we need discussion about it, we need dialogue about it, and then we need some solutions. I think, again, Hampton has done a really good pioneering effort. I mean, can it be better? I'm sure it can be. But Hampton is a model city. It has been for a long, long time. And from my perspective, it's a very good city. It's got a lot to be proud of. It's a very livable city. It's special places all over the place. On the other hand, it has gotten affected by technology. It's gotten affected by busyness. It's gotten affected by the lack of civic education. That is much a grassroots need where, let the civic associations come forward in a collaborative way and ask the questions you were asking. That would be powerful if, don't just...
Well, this generation is not a face-to-face generation. They do not go to civic groups. Now, I will say, because I'm a member of it, the Old Wythe Neighborhood Association has a wonderful Facebook page in which you see people's pictures and comments, and it can be a discussion for those people who just... it's not their habit anymore to be that face-to-face. But I think the city has to change because we go to those associations and we have to look broader at the other places people are congregating, whether that's a virtual congregating or an in-person congregating?
Well, I think yes and no on that. I think some of that's not acceptable. There's enough data to say you're not really communicating until there's at least some face-to-face in all of this. Trust is what most of good decision-making is built upon. And we are relying upon a lot of very distrustful processes and technologies. And again, I don't think you can get an apple out of a bunch of pears or something. I mean, you can't just demand in a Twitter and not be willing to be a part of a discussion. And yet, some people, that's exactly what they
I have
want.
watched my son flirt with the girl in the same room, back to back on their phones. I mean, there is a different way that young people communicate now. And we have to figure out how to play their game, but also how to pull them into other ways of communicating.
Well, that's true. I'm a grandparent, and my youngest daughter has two very young children, 2 and 7 months, and they're raising them on the internet. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are all these doctor advice things and white noise and all sorts of little technology things. And yet it's interesting the dynamic conversations that we need to have to them about, okay, let's talk about parenting,
Right, right.
And again, young people are pretty demanding. I mean, they think they're so smart. They think that the rest of us are kind of, old-fashioned or whatever. But our society is young and old. And, just like we're watching with the Affordable Care Act, there needs to be young and old in the equation.
That's right.
And again, until somebody can show you that you get better communication through Twittering and Facebook, do we really want to rely on something that's not as good as some version of face-to-face? I mean, at least throw in GoToMeeting.com or
Right,
Skype.
right. There are ways, yeah.
There are ways, but even those ways are somewhat less powerful than really a face-to-face. But they're certainly better
Than nothing.
Mm-hmm. And again, I think there needs to be a healthy tension in that discussion and not just, oh gosh, the city has got to figure out a way to put everything on Facebook.
Yeah.
I think Facebook is one tool of many. And
that's the thing now. You have to have a very big toolkit to reach and I'll tell you too, and you saw it from watching this show on YouTube, but this is a way that I think I try to carry these discussions, and people watching aren't actively involved, but maybe it helps them get actively involved. Maybe it sparks something, or they think, hey, I can do it, or I understand now, and now I can have an opinion, and I know who to call to get that across.
No, I think this kind of show is wonderful and necessary, and you do a very good job, and we need to do a very good job. We need people who can do a very good job, and you're asking great questions, and that's important. A lot of times we don't figure out the right questions. We just arc to solutions, and again, I think there's got to be some patience in the equations on both sides. Again, firing off a 3-word Twitter is from a citizen to a city official, in my opinion, is not real citizen participation, and vice versa. Some bureaucratic process that the citizen can't take enough time to figure out what they're really saying in page 47 of the regulation is not good either. But both parties need to be treated as equals and see what the Hampton system needs to be. Mm-hmm. And again, I think you all have a history of struggling with that, and I think it's obvious you're still, and that's very healthy.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for coming today and sharing this. And, you know, I could talk forever and I want to continue this discussion. So maybe you'll come back sometime and we can do some more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching. I hope this discussion has prompted some thought on your part and inspires you to help get a little bit more involved in whether it's your neighborhood or your government or your nonprofit, but get more involved in governance, not necessarily government. Thank you.